Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Stream Time Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our co-host, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, if anyone out there can hear the extra pep in my step, it's because we're recording this on Friday morning. The NFL is back on. Despite DAZN failing to renew my subscription for the last 3 weeks on renewal, intentionally, Nick, because if you remember, I had some payment issues a couple years back.
Yes,
So I
that's
moved
right.
it
Yeah.
from my credit card, my subscription, to my Monzo card, which never has money on it, so I could pay it when I want to pay it. But I did,
Genius.
but I did pay it this morning so I could watch the ad-free replay of the Cowboys Eagles. I feel like the Cowboys let themselves down. But anyways, Nick, football season is back.
So what do you watch it as? Do you watch it as the 40-minute? I think it's a 40-minute version. Is that the one that you watch
So
normally?
so there's multiple versions. Now, if I'm coming into the office, I will download the 40-minute version so I can watch it underground on the tube because obviously don't have any service down there.
Yeah.
This morning I was watching it from home. Dog usually wakes up about 7 a.m. So they do two full replays, one with adverts and then one without adverts. I don't know why anyone
Oh.
watched the version with adverts. But basically, yeah, you can watch the whole game without adverts. I think it cuts it down to about 2 hours. So dog wakes up at about
Okay.
7. I get up, I can pretty much just watch the whole game by the time it's work. So yeah, it kind of depends, Nick, where am I at watching it from? But that is one of the reasons why I'm willing to pay the subscription is to have all those different options depending on, where I'm at in the world, where I'm traveling to, and how I want to rewatch.
That's really interesting. So for those that aren't familiar with it, so my experience of it is like, a game takes around what, 4 hours roughly, give or take,
Yeah.
depending
Yeah.
on what's happening. And so there is a variety of different formats. The no ads down to 2 hours
Yeah.
that just shows how many ad breaks there are and
Yeah.
how many stoppages there are. I guess that's obviously the 4 hours includes the halftime breaks and all the
Yeah.
quarter time breaks that they remove as well. I used to watch quite often their 40-minute versions, so which is basically just all the plays, which I is good for time, but actually you do lose quite a lot of
Yeah.
the character of
Yeah.
the commentary and stuff in between the plays that I think is really does add a lot more than I expected. Maybe that's why they pay all those commentators such
Yeah.
extraordinary salaries. But and then one of the versions underneath that, there's a
There
15-minute
there
highlights, but
yeah,
that's on
there's a
YouTube, I think.
15-minute highlights, which is usually what's posted on YouTube, and then they have like a short highlights, which is like scoring
That's right.
plays,
Key plays.
turnovers, and it's
Yeah.
about 3-4 minutes sort of thing. So they do break it down. And to your point, yeah, like I watched the 40-minute version. It's not my preference because even to your point, like if they're always cutting it, like there might have been a big play or there might have been a turnover or there was something where a referee had to make an explanation. You don't get that context. You just kind of get that 10 seconds at a time. So it's good for when you need it. But yeah, to your point, it's not my preference, but I'm glad that I have the option should I want to.
Yeah, I have watched a few times where something's happened and they start breaking it down what's happened
Yeah.
and they cut to the next play and you really
Yeah.
feel like you're missing out.
Yeah.
But overall, the fact that they're able to do so many different versions
Yeah.
of the same game is pretty cool. And I was trying to think, are there any other sports that have a similar breadth of options of watching it after and and highlights and alike?
Yeah.
And I can't really think of that many. I've seen the NBA has
Yeah.
uh, a condensed version, a pretty standardized one.
Yeah.
But I can't think of anything to that extent where you can watch a
Yeah.
full game experience condensed down. Because
Yeah.
obviously, in things like in football, you have match of the day extended highlights, which are about what, 20 minutes or 10,
Usually.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 10 minutes,
Usually
something like
about
that.
usually about 20 minutes per game, but that's partly broken
Mm,
down by the analysis as well afterwards.
yeah, yeah. What sport would
Baseball.
suit that? Mm, yeah, that
Yeah,
would be
because you
much
you
better.
think about all the changes between all the innings and stuff like that. I'll need to do it because the folks at MLB actually gifted me a season pass for their video subscription, which was actually a gift from my parents 'cause my parents love baseball. They sit out in the barn and watch all 162 games. So I've not necessarily gone and watched because most baseball games are on by the time I'm in bed, but I'll need to go ask them um, if they do a condensed feature after the games. With baseball, I think would be perfect for it, just with the fact that they're changing every half inning.
I wonder because of the like for people over in Europe, like we are, well, you sort of are.
Yeah.
Uh, let's not open up that can of worms again. Um, who does it appeal to? So does it get a lot of traction actually in the US, or is it really a big
Yeah.
commodity for those that obviously the timings are pretty off? Like I think it started here 2:20 or
Yeah.
something in the morning, and I'm like, well, there's.
Yeah.
I actually woke up and I think it was up at like 5, and the game was
Yeah.
still running, and I wondered about
Yeah.
logging on.
Well, you know what, Nick? This segues into a story we were going to talk about today. It wasn't going to be the one we were going to lead off with, but it just feeds nicely, which is the NFL's expanded coverage in the UK. Those that aren't aware,
Mm,
within the UK, Sky have expanded their coverage. Sky used to have, I believe, two games. They had one game, which would be the 1 p.m. kickoff, and then one game that would be the kickoff for the 4 p.m. games, if we're talking stateside. And I think they did the late night game, but like that's just so late over here. I think it might have just been a straight rebroadcast as opposed to having any
yeah.
analysis. They're now expanding that to 6 games every Sunday. I believe they're gonna have 3 at each time slot.
6. Wow.
Yep, that's what I've seen in the news. And then Channel 5, going to be the free-to-air broadcaster, is gonna have 2 games. They're also gonna have the Super Bowl. They're gonna have the international series in London. And I believe there's one other set of rights. Oh, they have the Thanksgiving games, I believe, which is gonna bring
Oh,
it to free-to-air. So the coverage of the NFL in the UK massively expanding if you're just going on a percentage basis of how many games will be available, both behind the paywall with Sky, but also free to air, which I love. But Nick, it raised the question for me is if there's that much NFL on, is it still worth me paying 170 pounds for NFL Game Pass? Because I'm getting a lot of football because I have Sky. I've got Channel 5 obviously with my TV license. I had to ask myself, is the 170 pounds still worth it? Now, yes, because I don't for me personally, I don't know if the Bengals are always going to be
no.
selected. And also those other feet that expanded coverage does not include what we just talked about with being able
Yeah.
to watch the Thursday night game on Friday morning or the Sunday game Monday morning, vice versa, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd have that question. I think actually the NFL UK GM Henry Hodges even mentioned like this is not going to cannibalize NFL Game Pass because the people that actually want NFL Game Pass, they're the hardcores. They were going to get it anyway. So that's sort of me. So we were going to talk about this news story anyway, but it does come up like, is it even
Lovely
worth me to
segue.
pay for it with how much stuff is up there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that's where it's reinforcing the importance of having a platform that
Yeah.
offers more than just a straight live feed of
Yeah.
content. And the NFL's Game Pass, even before DAZN took it, I think is where the value was. I would subscribe to it because of all the other features.
Yeah.
Because I didn't watch that many live games, but because of the time zone difference, maybe a bit here and a bit there, but it was
Yeah.
on an ad hoc basis. But when you've got different types of features, I know that DAZN's adding a multi-view experience now as
Yep.
well. Um, yeah, it is a platform that is only targeted at diehards or tier one fans, but that's what most OTT platforms are basically targeted if at
Yeah.
that they are of that
Yeah.
sort of price point. So I just think it makes such a lot of sense for them to strike those deals if they were there to be made. And I think it is a bit of a what would you call it, like a litmus test, but also a signal
Yeah.
that maybe the NFL's fandom and momentum is growing in the UK to a
Yeah.
point now where there's so many broadcasters interested in having those games.
Yeah.
I will flip that though, and I'll say that well, we do know that live sports in general has a lot of momentum because of from an advertising perspective, because it's live and people therefore need to tune in for that. Um, the time zone that this is playing, the time window that these get matches are playing, is probably a pretty weak time for these broadcasters. So something that's live gives them another serious asset to sell to advertisers. And now that maybe fandom is at a decent enough level, now's the time to strike and to really
Yeah.
lean into that. But I don't think they could really strike any more deals
Yeah.
in market outside
No.
of what they've got today. And because wrapping more, making more visible even in the zone isn't going to give them that visibility because it's behind gating and the game. You know, they obviously DAZN have that free to access component now that they've started to build. Um, it just gives them another real serious access to a very important market for them. They've been focused on for a long time. So I think it's a huge win for the NFL.
Yeah, and I think again to flip it the other way, like yes, Sunday evening might not be prime time, but the other way I'd frame it as well is there's no Premier League on at that time.
No,
The
it's
Premier League,
so
I
clear
think the
window.
Premier League, yeah, plays 4:30 to 6:30. There's occasionally, if the schedule's really condensed, a late Sunday game, but there almost never is a Premier League game in that window. We're also going to talk about the zone in college football later. Again, Premier League coverage usually ends around 7:30, 8 o'clock over here. So you got all that there. So I do think it helps with that sense that it may not be the prime slot, but it's not necessarily, I think, competing against a bunch either.
No, and look, a little bit of competition wouldn't hurt them that much anyway.
Yeah,
I think there's obviously some major crossover with Premier League audiences, but
yeah,
also if the game they have on a Sunday afternoon isn't a big matchup, a big draw card, then yeah, I don't think you'll have too much competition. But the other thing I would add to this type of deal is a lot of people might think, oh, DAZN might not be happy about this. The fact that a pretty key market
yeah,
is now going to have more games available. To the point you raised about, is it going to be less likely that someone's going to sign up to Game Pass?
Yeah.
My view on that is this is a huge win for DAZN because it gets more people to view and start watching content. If they want to upgrade their experience, maybe progress up to being a tier one fan, they are the perfect platform for that. But this means they don't have to make huge investments in marketing and have this huge gap and chasm in between someone who wants to casually watch it through free to air and someone who's going to pay a pretty big sum for accessing a big subscription.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, this is, I would argue, more coverage than you would get in the US. And like I always talk about how much I love free to air in
Mhm.
the US, but typically in the US, like there's usually on free to air only one game available,
Yeah.
typically from CBS, and then one game available from Fox at both of those time slots. And then if you wanted more, you'd have to go to oh gosh, I've forgotten the YouTube version where they just bought the NFL Sunday Ticket. So realistically,
Oh,
like if
yeah.
you think that
Wow.
between Channel 5 and Sky, granted one of those is behind a paywall, there's going to be two games. Actually, take that back. I said there's going to be like three or four games in each of those time slots. Actually, there's more available without having to pay for the premium product in the UK. But then again, we say there's more Premier League games available in the US than there are in the UK. But actually, like in that sense, like there's as much stuff on without having to go to the premium product, in the UK than
Mm.
there is in the US at this moment.
That is interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I
Yeah.
just had thought
Mm.
about the fact that there's a game available in each slot
Yeah.
um, on different channels and platforms that they've done those deals with. But
Yeah.
it is interesting to think about the fact that so little of it is actually available nationally
Yeah.
unless you pay for the
Yeah.
premium product, even in
Yeah.
the US. So I guess in some instances you could say the UK is mirroring a
Right.
little bit the model of the US
Yeah.
in a way by having that big gap between what's available on free to air and
Mm.
then the premium paid offering. So
Yeah.
very, very interesting to see. And I wonder whether you'll see a series of other further deals being
Yeah.
done now by the NFL in other markets. Now they've got games in so many different countries now.
Mhm.
Will they continue to lean into getting expanded visibility on free to air? Because if they do, then I'm really intrigued to see where the NFL can get from a fan perspective over the next few years.
Yeah, well, one of the things we were talking about advertising. So again, Nick, we're going to keep not going in the order we talked about, but the things just keep segueing. So naturally, is talking about how big of a deal advertising is. And there's a story that came
Mm.
out, or two stories that came out this week that are both wrapped around advertising. One of them more controversial than the other. Sort of the first one more objectively. The NBC is going to be the broadcasters for the Super Bowl this year. They've come out and said they've already sold 90% of their regular season inventory, and they've already sold out their Super Bowl advertisements, and we're talking nearly 5 months in advance. And for context, Fox charged $8 million for a 30-second ad spot last year for the Super Bowl. And we just talked about how much you can reduce the game with an ad-free version. There's going to be a lot of 30-second commercials in that Super Bowl, Nick. So they've already managed to sell out pretty much all of their inventory spots, which I suppose isn't a surprise, but it just goes to show the power of advertising, and the Super Bowl itself just being the pinnacle, I think, of all advertising.
Well, like I was saying before, I really feel that everything I'm hearing and seeing is that there's even more inertia than ever around advertising in live sports events and live sports events that matter. I think particularly when with Netflix and these other streamers going into Amazon as well so heavily, it's democratized and broken down some of those barriers that were still existing around this. So for the fact that they've announced it, I mean, they always like to announce and create some goodwill about how they're selling, but 90% before the season even begins is sounds pretty impressive. Pretty impressive numbers given the amount of inventory. Slight segue. Have we talked much about upfronts before on the pod? I'm not sure if we have.
No, that does
No,
not
basically,
ringing
because
a bell for me.
are you familiar with that upfront?
No,
Oh, God, I
educate me. Yeah,
bamboozled you and maybe bamboozled some of our audience.
yeah,
Well, this is a really interesting part of the whole economy over in the US around advertising, is that each major network, and indeed now each of the major big tech platforms have these events called upfronts. Although I think the big tech companies use some other name, which is very similar.
yeah,
But basically, what it is they basically present their wares about how great they are, what content and programming they've got coming up,
mm,
and they invite loads of advertising execs and basically are selling to them in an audience. They basically invite
yeah,
them for a big schmoozy event, lots of probably caviar and drinks going everywhere.
yeah,
And the majority in some sports instances, and sorry, some networks instances, the majority of their advertising spend is actually wrapped up all in this one event. And basically, that is
Yeah.
effectively the ad execs for like these certain networks will
Yeah.
sit down with a couple of these guys and go like, well, what's it? Let's do a deal. Basically,
Yeah.
it's very old school, and at least
Yeah.
how it sounds from what I've heard. So that for the people that don't follow the US market, this is what happens. It's still a huge, huge part of the industry. And now in these upfronts, most of the major networks are investing even more into it. They're bringing loads of talent, bringing all the personalities and athletes and influencers and hosts to like basically make a bit of a sell and a bit of an entertaining sort of stage show, basically to get people excited about the event before they then go and sit down with the table and try and strike a deal. That sort of stuff, as far as I understand, does not happen anywhere else in the world other than the US. And that's why the advertising economy is so massive in the US versus everywhere else. The networks prioritize those events annually as big as any single thing they do for the whole year.
Yeah. Well, let's speak about some advertising that's not getting people fired up, Nick. We've gotten a little bit more details on it now, but NFL RedZone, I mean, we've argued on this show, might be the single best sports product in the world for what it provides, what it offers. I'm with you, Nick. It's usually a second screen for me because I like to watch the full game, but what it offers is great. It was announced very subtly that they're going to be inserting advertisements into this. And if you don't know what Red Zone is, part of the big deal is the intro. Scott Hansen, every time he comes on, sort of says, "Welcome for 7 hours of commercial-free football." That is literally the slogan
Mm.
that starts off every single one. He was on the Pat McAfee show, I believe, and he did the new intro, and everyone was like, something has changed. And he did acknowledge that there will be advertisements this year within Red Zone, which just at least I'm still on Twitter X, Nick. I told you I block anything that isn't sports related. People are fired up. They're like, why am I paying for a
I
premium
bet.
channel if it's got advertisements? And like there are all these like, oh, it's someone throwing a Hail Mary that's gonna break the commercial, which they're obviously not gonna do. But people are really fired up about it. They're like, why am I paying a premium price? They're like, this is the same thing Amazon Prime did where you bought a subscription, but now you have to buy an extra subscription if you want the ad-free version of it. People are getting really upset. Now, what's come out, Nick, my understanding is they're gonna run 4 commercials over 7 hours. They're gonna be 15 seconds apiece, and they will not cut away the video feed in terms of the full screen.
Uh,
So there was a lot of controversy. I think that controversy may have been a little dramatic. I mean, the word fan is short for fanatic, but there are people that are a little concerned that like this is just the start. They're just going to slowly add in ads. But I would say the news that's reported, this is not an ESPN decision because there's a lot of people being like, oh, ESPN's bought NFL
yeah.
Red Zone and they're already screwing it up. My understanding is ESPN doesn't have control over that at least for another year. And this decision is not coming from ESPN if we're trying to figure out where to lay blame. But Nick,
Mm.
I don't think you or I are probably surprised that they're gonna start adding commercials. I think, we think of people like our friends at Transmit that, do these add-in sort of non-disruptive models that it can work. I get why people are upset, Nick, but I'm not surprised.
That's the thing is I think they could have got away with calling it still commercial free if they
Yeah,
didn't stop the show and just keep it
yeah,
those overlay ads and like in the corner of the screen and so
yeah,
forth when they break away when they show multi-viewers just have
yeah,
an ad showing in the
yeah,
corner and at least done it that way. My guess then, given if you're saying that they come out
yeah,
and said that ESPN isn't the ones dictating that, my theory, my
yeah,
conspiracy theory is that ESPN wants to bring ads when they take over.
yeah,
And they've asked the NFL to take a bit of a bullet here and take a step forward to bridge the gap. So when ESPN do take over, it's not as big a deal
yeah,
when they start again inching in a bit further and
yeah,
further along the way. Obviously, they can't go too far because anyone who's watched the End Zone product, I'm trying to think of how to describe a better example. Like I guess it's with various football leagues across the world when they've got games
yeah.
going nonstop and you've
What
got a
was it,
live.
Saturday Football? What was the show that was on
Uh,
Sky? It was the
The
3
Super
o'clock window.
Saturday,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
no, Gillette. They used to call it Gillette because it was
yeah,
sponsored by
so yeah,
Gillette Super
yeah,
Saturday or Soccer
yeah.
Saturday, I think it was
Something like
called.
that, yeah,
MLS have obviously got their own version, and you
yeah,
often hear stories or launches of this new. It's red zone for
yeah,
this being brought
yeah,
to the fore, and obviously
yeah,
it's never going to be able to compete with the actual NFL's version itself. So I reckon that that's a bit of a look. We're going to rip the band-aid off now.
Yeah.
ESPN don't want to deal with the negative publicity when they
Yeah.
do take over it formally.
Yeah.
So NFL are taking a little bit of the bullet here and doing
Yeah.
it very, very softly. So yeah, they're not going to interrupt. Okay, fine, but maybe next year, maybe they'll finally give
Yeah.
Scott a toilet break somewhere along the way.
You know what? He talks about that because he's on air for 7 hours nonstop. So
Yeah.
he talks about, like, there's training and things like that where, like, and, like, how he has to prepare the day before, like, trying to essentially dehydrate himself, like, yeah, he didn't go into too many graphic details, but, like, it's not an easy gig. He's probably got the toughest job in all of, like, sports commentary or commentary in general. I don't know anyone that goes 7 hours straight without a break.
Well, I was just wondering whether he's ever been up during the night for a midnight
Yeah.
trip to the toilet, or he's probably
Yeah.
never had that in his life if he's that
Yeah.
well trained.
Yeah.
I mean, my old man bladder couldn't handle that. That's for sure. But I mean, staying hydrated, because if I don't drink water, like already we're what 20 minutes into this
Yeah.
conversation, I'm already looking for where my glass of water is to try and rehydrate my mouth. So,
Yeah.
full credit to him
Mm.
and what he does there. But look, I think it's inevitable in every instance. I think, in summary, I think every proposition that exists in sports around live content has to have multiple ways of driving value, driving financial returns. Subscription being one bit, advertising being an obvious another bit. It could be some sponsorship, it could be other means. So it was obviously inevitable it was going to get here. So we'll see how much they disrupt the feed. I think they'll take a very cautious approach in the beginning and go from there.
We hope you're enjoying the show. I just want to give a quick shout out to one of our founding Streamtime community members, LucidLink. Distributed teams, massive files, zero time to waste. In live sports and broadcasting, if you're waiting on files to transfer, sync, or download, you're already losing the race. LucidLink's cloud-native file system gives your team real-time access to massive media files from anywhere. Say goodbye to syncing and downloading, and hello to instant collaboration, the tools you use every day, like Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, and Media Composer. Whether you're cutting high-res match footage, color grading remotely, or managing production across different time zones, LucidLink makes remote workflows feel like you're in the same room. From ESPN and McLaren Racing to Warner Brothers and Paramount, production teams trust LucidLink to create without the wait. Try LucidLink free today at lucidlink.com and make remote collaboration feel local. So the story we were going to kick things off with, Nick, because like I said, as we're recording this is Friday morning, September 5th. We're going to have the YouTube game being broadcasted for, I guess, free to air. I don't even know if you call it free to air. AVOD, I guess, would be the appropriate term to place it under.
Yeah, I mean, not AVOD because it's live. So I think it's, God, what is the term for that?
Is it free to air if it's streaming?
Gosh, I should know that really.
Free to streaming.
Well, I would just call it free to air. I just
we'll
call it free to air because
air.
it's not linear. Like free to air on a different distribution model.
Yeah.
Because linear, it's not on a linear broadcast. It's streamed, but it's a free to air broadcast.
I'm sure someone will give us an answer. I'm sure someone will be happy to tell us what the official term is if they're listening. But anyways, tonight is going to be the YouTube game, which is going to be taking place between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers. I think I've mostly called them the Los Angeles Chargers now. There was a while I was still calling them San Diego. Same thing with the Raiders being Oakland. I think I've switched on my brain. They are the LA Chargers now. But Nick, a couple big things about this. A, it's going to be live stream for free on YouTube. And then the other big part of this as well is IShowSpeed. We've talked about the creator economy, is also going to be doing a alternative broadcast of that hosted on his channel. And just for the numbers, he has 43 million subscribers. So not a small, insignificant number. He's not going to be the only content creator that's going to be doing this all cast, but he's essentially the biggest one of the group. That game is going to be hosted down in Brazil Friday night. But, Nick, the NFL, they keep trying, doing new things. And, for you, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about YouTube recently and where it should fit within your strategy, whether it should be your main platform, a supplementary platform, where should it fit? The NFL, has to deal with YouTube TV, but that's a completely different thing all to begin with. They've got different streaming deals with Amazon and NBC. They've got their traditional linear broadcast partners, and now dipping the toe, live streaming a game on YouTube.
So let's take a step back quickly and remember what this deal is. They paid about 100 million US, I think, for this opportunity to take these rights, take them globally. So that's a big investment, particularly when YouTube's message has been, ever since the Sunday Ticket deal, is we're not buying rights anymore. but they felt the need to make this investment. And the question is why? Now, my theory on that is basically they want to use this as the ultimate case study to say, look, we're going to pay a fortune for these rights. We're going to monetize them and we're going to make it worth our while to spend this money. But following this, we're not going to buy any more rights. We're going to show you how it's done. Because remember, YouTube's model is pretty much primarily ad funded. They, I believe, will be also selling some sponsorships and doing special advertising packages mainly on their content. I'm intrigued to see who they're using as their broadcast partner to produce the live broadcast. I'm guessing there's one of the main free-to-air partners in the US is taking that. But anyway, my point here is I think they're using this as a case study, and then they're going to go walk away, go, look, we've shown you now we can generate incredible audience numbers. We've created a new way of distributing content by working with creators to create all these extreme distribution channels. They can basically, with those relationships, can scale their audience to unprecedented levels, tapping into an IShowSpeed and all these other influencers and say, hey, we're going to give you the rights to the NFL here. In return, we're going to share ad revenue off your feed and you get the rights for free. I mean, how are they not going to say yes to that? And instantly, YouTube in this instance just scales their audience to incredible levels. So I just think the sky is the limit for this type of model and approach. I never thought about the fact that YouTube might take this such heavier creator-led option. I remember when they did the Sunday Ticket deal, part of that was giving creators access to the rights in some instances to create alternative broadcasts, but never at this scale. This feels pretty massive.
It's not the only thing. We talked about IShowSpeed is going to be live streaming from his channel, but also we got gifted something in preparation for this. MrBeast putting out advertisement, a gimmick, promotion, whatever you want to call it, saying he's bought the NFL and he's brought in all of these streamers. IShowSpeed, one of them I mentioned to you before the show, Nick. I'm a little upset. While I understand putting him next to Tyreek Hill because of some of the stuff that he is technically from Cincinnati, Ohio, and is a Cincinnati Bengals fan, but they even got MrBeast trying to come in and promote this and whip this up because obviously MrBeast is the king of all things YouTube and, trying to plug in with his influence as well. But Nick, you didn't sound like you're necessarily loving this idea.
Well, I think the idea.
Did I throw you under the bus?
Well, I think the idea of leaning into the creative economy is absolutely genius, and I think is what everyone in sports should be paying so much attention to this model and to this approach. I've been talking about this for years to say to people. I had a conversation recently this week with a rights owner who approached me to get some advice. It's like, think about giving some of your rights to your athletes and to your athletes and basically people who have either got a big audience or want to have a meaningful audience and have the ability to grow one and to scale it, because that incentive of taking on their own rights just massively increases the scale of the audience and visibility of that live experience. And by doing so, all those other levers that can be pulled in terms of not only just getting mass interest and fandom, but also sponsorship, obviously merchandise sales, and etc., can then be layered on with this huge audience. That's why we've been saying for a long time, you can't just take a subscription only approach, right? So this is just basically destroying the subscription model and saying, hey, we have a new way of working, which is get your rights onto YouTube. You will generate revenues. If YouTube is saying this, we can predict what you can basically earn, not guarantee, but close to. And then you have all these other levers to expand your audience and expand your revenue. It just makes working with YouTube almost a no-brainer over time. Now, I'm saying that which makes me probably sound like I'm selling the life out of YouTube. We did a pod on this a couple of weeks ago where try to set the scenes of expectation here. It sounds great in theory. For anyone who's not the NFL, it's very difficult to pull some of these levers and get a IShowSpeed and MrBeast to work with you. So it's not that easy for everyone. But I think relative terms, if you're a sports property that's struggling to get a rights deal, look at this type of approach to see if you can really scale your audiences using athletes and other maybe influencers around your sport, and you might be shocked about the scale that you can get. Now, I would add the question about this particular campaign. What I cringed a little bit was about the whole 3-minute video that's being done and this whole MrBeast has bought the league and but and Roger Goodell acting as a like supporting cast member through the 3-minute pitch along all these other influencers and the storyline basically is he buys the league and Mr. Beast's first decision at the press conference is to make every team increase the size of their official roster from 53 to 54. And the 54th has to be an influencer. And so you see like Dude Perfect and these other guys go, oh, we're going to be the Cowboys and blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
It goes on. And what I'm just a bit cringy about is, well, I'm a bit uncertain how I feel. Is like at one stage, I think it's really smart to lean into that world, and who knows what you'll see in the future if this works with YouTube, whether Dude Perfect might pick up their own alternative feed and
Yeah.
broadcast and the like. But just how far are we going to go with leaning into stuff that is not actually the core sport, and what is the end point of all this? Like, I feel like I might be going to sound like I'm about 75 years old saying the traditions of the game, but
Yeah.
it's leaning so much into the creator and influencer world these days. Where's the end point? Is there a stage
Yeah.
where we can't go further than that? Or is
Yeah.
actually in 10, 20 years time, you could have a team of influencers playing in the NFL? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting bit, I'll flip it a little bit, is we previously spoke about sort of the impact of golf because you made the comment that anecdotally you've seen more young people golfing than you ever have before. I've read some studies saying, kind of talking about participation in golf, and a lot of it is credited with not necessarily anything the PGA Tour is doing, and that's not a shot at the PGA Tour, but the
Yep.
fact that the amount of golf content creators that are popping up, and that's still people going out and playing the traditional version of golf. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know, Nick. It's a good question. It'll be really interesting to see if it drives more people to participate. I guess the question is, does it matter? It's interesting.
I wonder where the future also lies where it comes to the pressure that's going to be made on certain athletes in certain leagues. I can imagine startups and disruptor leagues, especially NFL, will probably be much more cautious on this.
Mm.
Is how much pressure they'll have to make their own content and become visible, think of a Grant Horvat, from a golf perspective, or Bryson's already, he's obviously one of the world's best, but those players that aren't necessarily at the top tier, but they might be playing in a disruptor league or a startup. Let's say what's one of the American football leagues that's popped up over the years, like the
I mean,
UFL or
well, I
something.
was even thinking something like the Big Three league, where like they're
Mm.
trying to
Oh
go
yeah,
more of that personality led approach to get people to drive into things on that side. You could think of things like TGL golf, that
yeah,
disruptor
yeah.
side. So
But basically,
I think
what are
there's
they getting asked for? Like, what
yeah,
is like at some stage is going to be, well, you need to produce 10 pieces of content through your
yeah,
channels and do all these types of things to make sure your audience is a certain scale. And if your audience isn't a certain level, you're not invited.
mm,
Like,
yeah,
I just wonder where it's going to get to at this point
yeah,
because it's delivering results in terms of
yeah,
audience and visibility, and that's the
yeah,
tricky bit. That's why I'm not saying
yeah.
it's something they should be
Mm.
ignored or moved away from. But there's got to be an end point at some time, or maybe there
Yeah.
isn't.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna stick with football, Nick. And there's a little bit of basketball tied into this. One of my biggest complaints, being in the UK, roughly 10 of the last 12 years over 2 trips, basically, and permanently now for 9 years. We've talked there's no college football here. Like, it drives me crazy. Like, why is no? Because like, the rights can't be that expensive, and, like, most of these games are I mentioned earlier, they're on late night Saturday. Like, there's no Premier League on, there's no Formula 1 on, unless it's the US Open, there's no golf on, like, why is there no college football? Finally, Nick, someone has put a serious, stake in the ground to say they're gonna take college football, and it's the people we said should have been doing it all along, which is DAZN. Um, I've always made the argument, you've already got NFL Game Pass, you might as well just make yourself the home of football. Obviously, on an incredibly smaller scale, they've got the European League of Football, the ELF. So it's like you might as well just get everybody, get all the football, and just become the home of football. So for this, I don't know the exact dollar amounts, but DAZN has agreed a sub-licensing deal with ESPN for college football and college broadcast, in the UK, Europe, and Middle Eastern, North African region. So 25 live college football games per week. And once we get to college basketball season, 20 live college basketball season. So for me, Nick, I don't have a ton of analysis other than I'm just really happy that this has finally happened.
And I think a bunch of it's going to be made free to air as well, made
Yeah.
available free to air, which means they're obviously using it as a funnel to grow audiences as well as try and build up their portfolio to drive advertising revenue, which I think is an interesting uh, dimension or layer two DAZN strategy that seems to be becoming more and more prevalent is that investment into freely accessed content to drive their advertising business. But look, I think your point's right. I think DAZN are absolutely in the prime position for being a leading voice and platform, particularly with the NFL deal,
Mm.
also the NHL deal that they have in place as
Yep.
well. I mean, and I think in some markets they might even have a bit of NBA in a few smaller
Mm.
markets as well. So I think them trying to be this kind of destination for US sports makes a lot of sense. Now, what I would flip it though, I would say that there's two things really. One was that I was
Yeah.
surprised to find out that ESPN actually already owned the international rights for some
Yeah.
time. So they've been sitting on those rights and they've actually been dark in a couple of markets
Mm.
because they couldn't strike a deal. Now you layer that in with Disney, ESPN, and it just shows how little the NCAA or ESPN cared about international, that they didn't even
Yeah.
bother broadcasting it in a bunch of markets. Now, with what they're doing across Europe with Disney Plus, my thinking is that now's the time for
Yeah.
that to be just plugged into what they're doing in, for example, in the Baltics, in the Nordics, in Sweden, as an example, which we've covered a few weeks back, where they've got the Europa League and the Conference League, and they've got a whole host of TGL and a bunch of other rights there, and they're doing it under the ESPN brand. Why not just layer this in there and really make it a destination? And what conversation I have with people is like, well, why are you using the ESPN brand to house this content in like Sweden when no one knows ESPN for anything other than American sports and American culture, and using it for European based sports? So this would just make such a natural extension,
Mm.
I think, of that. So really surprised that ESPN hasn't tried that at least for like
Yeah.
a period of time to say, hey, we're
Yeah.
going to have this destination for all college sports now in smaller markets, low risk. But I imagine DAZN probably committed a pretty decent deal for them. That look, we'll just step away. You guys deal with this
Yeah.
this set of rights and see how you go. And if they see DAZN doing well, they can always just bring it back onto their own platform if they continue to own those international rights.
And who knows, with the sub-licensing, they may still have the ability to do so, and they're just choosing not to at this
Yeah,
moment.
true.
So, yeah, because like I said, I wasn't able to find any particular dollar amount that was associated with this. So
Yeah,
maybe it's a non-exclusive thing that, yeah, if it works out,
could
they
be
might listen to the podcast as well and decide that Nick knows something.
genius. Yes. I'd like to
Um,
think that happens a lot, Chris, but I
yeah,
probably
yeah,
less than I would expect. No,
yeah,
hope. No,
you
expect. I
never,
think that's not what
you,
I mean. That sounds
yeah,
way too arrogant. No, I mean I know that those guys listen because I've been contacted
yeah,
various times, but
yeah.
if they're taking advice from me to make decisions,
Mm.
then I'm a bit actually more worried for them than anything.
uh, Speaking of ESPN, though, Nick, one of the stories we've covered a couple times in a couple different angles is the UFC moving over to Paramount
Mm,
Plus, part of that $7.7 billion deal. The big part of that being no more pay per view. But one of the things that sort of what is ESPN? They've been the longtime partner, and technically ESPN, that deal still I believe it runs through the end of this year. There's still some
yeah.
time left on the end of it. But what has come out is that UFC Fight Pass may partner with ESPN's new direct to consumer platform to still have the UFC content directly available via ESPN's new streaming service. Now, to be clear, this would not include any of believe they call them the numbered fights, which are obviously the really major ones. I don't think it includes some of their other events, but it would have all of the archive content that it sits in there. So basically, ESPN still having a little bit of a small foothold on the UFC as it grows, maybe somewhere else. So I think, Nick, this was maybe one of the questions we were asking. How exclusive was the deal? We knew the UFC Fight Pass, it's the equivalent of the NFL Network, where it's kind of owned by the NFL, but also slightly operates independently. We didn't know what was going to happen with that. Similar. What was it? Was it WWE completely moved its platform onto Netflix? We didn't hear anything about the UFC Fight Pass and that original Paramount Plus deal. So I guess that answers some questions for us, Nick.
Yeah, maybe that was one of the reasons ESPN was quite happy to step away from the gargantuan number that
Yeah.
Paramount paid and not willing to bid for that. Um, yeah, this idea of wrapping, I guess, products like Five Pass or OTT platforms like Game Pass into a more major networks platform like DAZN and ESPN. Uh, I'm still not sure how successful that is
Yeah.
as an approach, I think DAZN will tell you it's been very successful for them to have the NFL, though they paid a lot for
Yeah.
those rights to grow. Does the UFC gain a lot of value losing that relationship with fans and giving it all over to ESPN? Again, if the price is right, yes, it does, and they can find other
Mhm.
ways to build that relationship. I think basically a lot of these rights owners have now just become a lot more comfortable with building relationships with fans in different ways and not having to own every data point of their audience like many people might have told them over the years. So I don't really know. I think ESPN might have NHL TV in the US also on the platform. So they might be looking to take this approach and add a few more products. And basically, ESPN starting to mirror a little bit of what Zone looks like in terms of having these
Yeah.
platforms within the platform, which I'm sure DAZN would take, you know, take quite favorably to see that they're being mimicked by their competitors in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think from USC's perspective, it makes sense. It wasn't going to be wrapped up with Paramount Plus. You've already got that existing relationship with ESPN. From a fan perspective, I know I talked about I go back and watch the game the next day. I don't think that's the kind of archive content they're referring to is going to be available on there. So I'd be curious to know how much the UFC fan is going to want to go back over to ESPN. I don't know. It'll be interesting, but for the UFC, I
Yeah.
guess it makes sense if someone's willing to pay for it.
Yeah, and obviously, the ESPN's going to invest an incredible amount of money in
Yeah,
growing their direct-to-consumer
yeah.
platform itself, so they will have a huge audience base, no doubt, that the UFC can be easily the UFC Fight Pass can be easily marketed to try and drive into the platform if they are interested, even if they don't have anything else, available.
The last thing we're going to cover today, there was an announcement made yesterday. Yesterday, as in when we're recording this, not yesterday, as whenever you were listening to the podcast. The WSL has secured 13 new international media rights deals for the upcoming 25-26 season. Like you said, when I say global, it's global. They've got Stan Sport in Australia. Nick, you're going to have to tell me who Stan Sport are. I've not heard of Stan Sport.
Yeah, they are an OTT platform for the free-to-air broadcaster Channel 9, which is basically the biggest broadcaster
I
or
have
number
heard of
2.
Channel 9. Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of Channel 9. Just haven't heard of their TT Shrimp Flower. Movie star in Spain. We've had them speaking.
Launched after I left the country, I might add. So,
Oh,
tested my memory a little bit there, but
oh,
I have
there you
followed it
go.
to some extent.
Yeah. Fox Sports in the US and then BN Sports again in the Middle East, Northern Africa region. So Nick, in terms of this for them, I'm not aware of a ton of women's sports at this stage that have necessarily these international deals. I don't necessarily know what the dollar amounts are going to be, but just in terms of them trying to grow it, we've seen multiple instances of people trying to do this. You know, UEFA tried to do this with the zone a little bit with their Champions League coverage. But for someone from a domestic league perspective to be doing this internationally, I don't know how much the dollar amounts always matter, Nick, but just simply being able to broaden it, I think, is an important step just in the growth of coverage for women's sports and women's football in particular.
Well, big time. I'll take it a step further than that, and let's just assume that the media rights revenue is fairly marginal
Yeah.
from international. It could be better, but
Yeah.
given some of the ones you've mentioned, you know, your Movistars and Fox
Yeah.
Sports and beIN Sports, they have huge reach, and I imagine that was the main focus here was to get visibility not only on women's football but particularly on the WSL because I feel like there's a bit of a race going on. You got the NWSL in the US, who's got a lot of investment, done a lot of deals in the US market. Probably feels like a chance that they can really throw some cash and activity to try and build the NWSL into the Premier League of women's football. And obviously, WSL's trying to latch on and hold on to that position, given they're also based in the UK. But if they're not careful, they could lose that because of the money that Americans inevitably will throw at grabbing market share. So I think it's important that they really got some major visibility and tried to stamp or put their flag in the ground as the number one league in the market, and getting exposure in some pretty key markets with these types of broadcast partners will really help them. So I think they're on a bit of a race. I think they're in a bit of a race to solidify that because we all know if you're at the top of the food chain, the revenues look a lot more favorable than for those at number two.
And be an early mover as well. And I think one of the interesting things there's a statistic in the article that reported that 76% of audiences for the WSL come from outside the UK, which I think was a pretty extraordinary and telling number. So that might explain the push for international. But you know, maybe WSL can follow in the Premier League steps and be someone who makes more money internationally than they do domestically. Not that the Premier League's struggling with the money they make from Sky Sports and TNT, but at the moment they are the only sports league I'm aware of that makes more money internationally than domestically. So maybe they can follow a similar path.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question or interesting stat. But if you then thought about how many people follow the Premier League out of the UK versus in it,
True.
and actually then the UK would look really small in
When
terms
you
of
think of it
overall
that way,
market
yeah.
size. So it's an interesting comparison, though. I still think it's definitely something that it's
Yeah.
so skewed that way.
Right.
Just how where is the opportunity to, like, what's the scale? What's
Yeah.
the dream opportunity? Because then you also have the UEFA Champions League, the Women's Champions League that's got visibility across
Yeah.
Disney Plus now as well. And they use YouTube and so forth. That's kind of this
Right.
other competition that sits there
Yeah.
that it's just such a different set of
Yeah.
circumstances to the men's game. I'm just fascinated to see if they can solidify themselves. And I just saw there was a record transfer for nearly
Yeah.
1.5 million by the Lionesses, owned by what was that lady who spoke at
I know who you're talking about. Was it? Is it? Oh gosh, Michelle King.
she's a massive investor in women's football.
Michelle King.
Yes, well done.
My memory is
5
pulling things
points.
out. But there's
Yeah.
so many speakers at sports pro events over my 6 years, Nick. Sometimes I got to really go through the Rolodex and pull it back.
I used to have a good memory with all this stuff, and now
Yeah.
my memory's a sieve.
Yeah. Well, speaking of interviews, historic interviews, Nick, and now we're really going to end the podcast off on a weird one. We do have our Sports Pro AI event coming up by the time this podcast comes out. I think it'll be 2 weeks after that. Um, I'm going to be super excited about this. I don't know how many of our listeners will know this, particularly outside of the US. I'm going to interview Greg Oden. He will certainly
Are
be the
you? I wondered
tallest
who got
speaker.
that.
Yeah. I put in a request for that one. He will certainly be the tallest speaker to ever appear at a sports pro event, and I'm pretty willing to bet we will never break that record. Those that don't know, Greg Oden, former number 1 NBA draft pick, from Indiana, went to Ohio State. I'm from Ohio. So when I heard he was coming over for the event, I messaged our two Wills and I was like, I want that interview. That is one I won't forget.
What college did he play for? Because that was obviously where he came, claim to
Uh,
fame was obviously his college career was incredible.
Came from Ohio State. Him and Michael
I did wonder.
Conley. Yeah, him and Michael Conley were teammates in
Ah,
high school in Indiana. Then they went over to Ohio State. Um, Good lord, there was a third guy on that team who went to Dunbar High School in Dayton. It's gonna drive me crazy.
we're losing our audience here, mate.
We
We're
are,
losing
we
our
are. Well,
audience here.
it's a good thing we're
Going
45
too
minutes in.
deep,
Yeah,
deep
too deep
Ohio.
into the lore. Yeah, but yes, I'll be
Yeah.
interviewing Greg Oden. I'm very excited about that. Buy your ticket to Sports Pro AI.
So you can see Chris talk about Ohio, his home state. He over 7 feet tall.
Yeah,
That's a big man. That's a
he's a
big
very,
man.
very big man. But yeah, so yeah, that's how we're gonna end today's podcast, Nick. Going through guest at former events and interviews. I'm looking forward to future events.
Well, look, I'm looking forward to that event actually. In all
Yeah,
seriousness as well, because it's only a couple of weeks away now, and we're doing this event because AI is such a hot topic across the wider sports industry, but especially across sports media, which we spend so much time talking about. So I'm really excited to hear so many great examples now of where AI has got to over the last 12 months on stage at that event with major broadcasters, rights owners, everything from fan engagement to content creation, basically all corners, performance, data, everything there. So really looking forward to that event in London. And if you want any more information, don't be afraid to get in touch with either of us and
yeah,
we can send you some more info on it. But it should be really interesting to see because
yeah,
that's the thing I love about these events. Like we had it with the Madrid event as well, is you see it's like snapshots in time. Like last year, we were a little bit more of a discovery phase, like what is AI relative to
yeah.
sports? Now, like we're a year in, so many people have been working on and using AI. Where are we at now? What examples have we got to point at? We've got a lot of really exciting examples of that event to see firsthand.
Absolutely. Do get in touch, and thank you everybody once again for joining us for another episode of Stream Time Sports.